Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. Looking back, it was hard to pinpoint exactly when things began to change between Claire and me. We were married for almost a decade, 2 kids, a house in the suburbs, and a life that felt solid, secure. I worked remotely in IT, a job that allowed me to spend time with our kids, shuttling them to school and soccer games, while Claire worked in marketing, with plenty of late meetings and occasional business trips. I trusted her implicitly. Why wouldn't I? The turning point, though, came on a chilly Friday afternoon. Claire and I were on our way to North Carolina, a spontaneous mountain getaway she'd suggested, just for the 2 of us. Our first couples retreat since our honeymoon. But about halfway through the drive, she suddenly insisted we stop at a Wawa to use the bathroom. Can't it wait? I'd asked, only half joking. The nearest rest area wasn't far, but she was adamant, almost agitated. She pulled off the next exit, and as she dashed out of the car, she left her phone on the passenger seat. While she was inside, her phone screen lit up with a notification, and then another. I looked down, surprised to see the same name, Nate, pop up on the screen twice within minutes. Nate? I knew her colleagues well enough, and none of them were named Nate. I wondered if it was someone she'd met during one of her trips, some networking connection, maybe. But before I could think much about it, I saw her walking briskly back toward the car, faster than I'd ever seen her move. She looked rattled. She didn't even glance at me before she snatched the phone from my hand. Whoa, Claire, I laughed, trying to lighten the mood. Didn't know it was a race. She forced a smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Sorry, it's just a work thing. They keep bugging me. I nodded, letting it slide. But the whole situation left me unsettled. A sense of unease washed over me, one I couldn't shake as we continued on to the cabin. The rest of the trip was fine, on the surface, anyway. But it was as if a veil had lifted. Claire spent much of her time glued to her phone, often stepping away to take calls that, when I later checked, seemed absent from her phone history. I tried to ignore it, tried to brush off the nagging feeling that something was wrong, that maybe her work was more personal than she let on. But as much as I wanted to believe her, that weekend marked the start of my doubts. And by the time we got home, I knew I needed answers. One evening, a week or so after our return, I sat alone in our living room, staring at her phone bill. I'd already taken a peek while she was sleeping and noticed something strange. A single number with a Virginia area code showed up repeatedly, more than any other. It wasn't any of her usual work contacts. No family members had that area code either. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the evidence seemed to be gathering against her. I decided not to confront her yet. Instead, I spent the next few days trying to uncover more. I checked her emails, noticing a sudden uptick in late-night correspondence. I even peeked at her travel receipts, comparing her trip dates against the company's official events calendar online. My heart sank each time I found something that didn't add up. Then came the tipping point. I found a hotel reservation under her name in Virginia, during a supposed conference week that, according to her work calendar, didn't exist. As I sat there holding the printed reservation, my chest tightened, my stomach churning with a sickening sense of betrayal. I could have exploded then, marched up to her, and demanded answers. But I held back, swallowing down the anger that clawed at me. I decided I needed more than just suspicions, I needed irrefutable proof before confronting her. So, I took things a step further. I signed up for a service that tracked phone numbers, hoping it would give me some insight into who this Nate really was. The moment I saw his full name appear, my worst fears became reality. Nathaniel Dawes, a name I didn't recognize but would come to know as intimately as if he were part of my own life. At that moment, I was paralyzed by the weight of what I'd uncovered. Years of marriage, family holidays, shared dreams, they all seemed like scenes from a distant, unreal life. I sat in silence, staring at his name on the screen. The days following my discovery were some of the longest I'd ever endured. Every small, unexplained detail in our marriage started to take on new meaning. Claire's work trips, that seemed so sporadic, the random nights when she came home later than usual, the sudden distance I'd felt in her, even though I hadn't wanted to see it before, I realized now that the signs had been there all along. The only thing stopping me from confronting her was the kids. I wanted to handle this as smoothly as possible for their sake. If I was going to turn our lives upside down, I needed a concrete plan, not just a blow-up confrontation. So I decided to keep quiet, to watch and wait, letting her feel secure while I gathered everything I needed. One night, about a week after my initial discovery, Claire mentioned a work event, a networking dinner she claimed she couldn't miss. I watched her as she casually told me she'd be home late, the lie rolling off her tongue as smoothly as if it were the truth. She kissed me on the cheek as she left, and as I watched her walk out the door, a strange numbness settled over me. The betrayal stung, yes, but even worse was the realization that she could deceive me so effortlessly. That night, I decided to follow her. I waited a few minutes after she left, grabbed my coat, and drove the familiar route toward her office. I kept a safe distance, my headlights off as I trailed her. To my surprise, she didn't go to her office building or to any restaurant in town. Instead, she drove to a quiet, dimly lit street and parked in front of an apartment complex I'd never seen before. She got out of the car and walked to the door, glancing over her shoulder once before slipping inside. I watched her disappear and felt a surge of rage. I wanted to storm in after her, demand answers, make her face what she'd done. But I knew I couldn't, at least, not yet. As I sat there in the car, I wrestled with every impulse in my body. But I knew I had to think rationally, even if it killed me. If I wanted to confront her with undeniable proof, I needed more than a single sighting. So, instead of following her inside, I drove home, each mile filled with a storm of emotions that I couldn't let out. I'd seen enough to know what I had to do next. Over the following days, I prepared. I quietly hired a private investigator, someone who could gather evidence without her suspecting a thing. The PI assured me he would be discreet, that he'd get everything I needed. And so, I tried to carry on as if nothing had changed, though the reality was tearing me apart. The investigator moved fast. Within a few days, he'd sent me the first set of photos. There she was, Claire, standing outside the same apartment building, hand in hand with a man I'd never seen before. They were laughing, leaning into each other as if they hadn't a care in the world. He was tall, maybe in his early 40s, with dark hair and a smug look I wanted to knock right off his face. I could barely stand to look at the photos, yet I forced myself to study every detail. Each picture felt like a fresh stab, another layer of betrayal exposed. Then, the final piece fell into place. The investigator managed to confirm that Claire had been seeing this man for months, likely using her so-called business trips as an excuse to spend weekends with him. I couldn't believe the depth of the deception. She had created an entire second life with this man, and I was just a side character. The investigator's report left nothing to question. He tracked her movements, capturing her as she met with Nate in hotels, restaurants, even parks. They looked like a couple, happy and carefree, and it made my blood boil. But the moment that truly broke me was a photo taken just outside a hotel, where she kissed him on the cheek, laughing as he pulled her into an embrace. That was my wife. The woman I'd given a decade of my life to, the mother of my children, wrapped in the arms of a stranger. I shut the file and closed my laptop, fighting to hold back the tidal wave of anger and grief. It felt like my heart was being ripped apart. I wanted to confront her, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she'd caused me. But then I remembered the kids, the stability they needed, the home we'd built together that they counted on. This wasn't just about my pain or my revenge, it was about protecting them. Claire's lies had been exposed, but I still had a choice to make. Confront her and risk blowing everything up, or let her think I was still in the dark while I put a plan in motion to protect myself and the kids. The path was clear. I would bide my time, let her play her game a little longer, until I had everything I needed to take my life back without leaving any loose ends. The following morning, Claire was her usual self, chatting about her upcoming work trip and asking if I could handle the kids for the weekend. I nodded, my face a mask of calm, while inside, I was steeling myself for what was coming. This wasn't just about catching her in the act. It was about taking control, about ending this whole charade on my terms. And so, I waited. The day finally came. Claire packed her suitcase for yet another business trip, promising the kids she'd bring back souvenirs from some imaginary conference. She kissed them goodbye, gave me a quick peck on the cheek, and walked out the door with barely a second glance. I watched her pull out of the driveway, my stomach a mix of anger and resolve. The moment I'd been waiting for was here. I had every piece of proof, every photo and time-stamped message, all laid out neatly in a file. After all the waiting, the pretending, the slow burn of betrayal, I was finally ready. I called my parents, asking if they could take the kids for the weekend. They agreed without hesitation, and within an hour, the kids were off, none the wiser. I'd planned every detail of what would happen next. I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed, and I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story of our marriage without facing the consequences. With the house empty, I sat down at the kitchen table, placing the thick folder in front of me. I was calm, almost unnervingly so. My mind felt razor-sharp, the pain of betrayal honed into a weapon I was ready to wield. I wasn't going to scream or throw things. That would be letting her off easy. No, I wanted her to face the full weight of what she'd done, no excuses, no escape. Hours later, I heard her car in the driveway. She'd come back early, her suitcase still in hand as she walked through the door, startled to find me sitting in the kitchen, waiting. "Hey," she said, her face flushing slightly, probably because she'd told me she'd be gone until Sunday night. "You're up late." I didn't expect. "Sit down," I said, my voice steady but cold. She looked at me, confused, a nervous smile flickering across her face. "Is everything okay?" "Sit down, Claire," I repeated, watching as the smile faded from her face. Reluctantly, she set down her suitcase and lowered herself into the chair opposite me. "What's going on?" she asked, glancing at the folder in front of me. Her hands were clenched together, her knuckles white. "I think you know exactly what's going on," I said, sliding the folder toward her. "Open it." She hesitated, her eyes darting from the folder to my face. "Mark, what is this?" "Proof," I said simply. "Proof of every lie you've told me, every weekend you've worked late, every business trip you've taken in the last year. It's all in there." Her face went pale, her hands shaking as she opened the folder. I watched her as she flipped through the photos, the hotel receipts, the phone records, every piece of her deceit laid out in black and white. I wanted her to feel it, the full impact of what she'd done, with no way out. "Mark," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can explain." "Don't even try," I interrupted, my tone icy. "You can't explain this. You lied to me, to our kids, to everyone we know. You made me believe we had a real marriage while you were out there, building a life with him." She looked down, her eyes filling with tears, but I felt no sympathy. She'd shattered my trust, broken every vow we'd made, and now she had the nerve to cry. No, I wasn't going to let her hide behind tears. "How long?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "How long have you been sneaking around with him?" She swallowed hard, glancing up at me. "Mark, it was a mistake. I never meant for it to go this far. I was unhappy, and he listened." "Unhappy?" I scoffed. "And instead of talking to me, you ran to him? That's your excuse." "It wasn't like that," she said, her voice breaking. "You were always so busy, so wrapped up in your own world. I felt invisible." "Invisible?" I repeated, the word cutting through me. After everything I've done for you, for this family? I sacrificed my time, my energy, and you were just, invisible. She bit her lip, looking away, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook. You know what I felt, Claire? I asked, my voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. I felt stupid. Every time you left for a work trip, every late night, I defended you. I told myself you'd never do this to me, that you'd never betray our family. And the whole time, you were lying to my face. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I watched her struggle, searching for some excuse, some way to twist her actions into something less damning. But there was nothing she could say that would change the truth. Did you love him? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked down, her face streaked with tears. No, she said, shaking her head. I thought I did, maybe, but it was just an escape. It wasn't real. I felt a hollow laugh escape me, bitter and cold. Not real. You spent more time with him than you did with me, Claire. You built a life with him, one you were willing to tear our family apart for. Don't tell me it wasn't real. She looked up at me, her expression pleading. Mark, please, I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But can't we try to fix this? For the kids. For a moment, the desperation in her voice almost softened me. But then I remembered the lies, the nights I spent alone while she was with him, the plans she made without a second thought for me or our family. No, I said, standing up. You don't get to ask for a second chance, not after this. Her face crumpled, the reality of what she'd done finally sinking in. But Mark, please, I'm begging you. I'll do anything. Just, let me stay. I looked down at her, the woman I'd loved, the woman I'd trusted more than anyone in the world. And all I felt was a hollow emptiness where that love had once been. You should go, Claire, I said quietly. Pack your things and leave. I'll explain it to the kids in the morning. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic. But where will I go? That's not my problem anymore, I said, turning away. You made your choice. Now you'll have to live with it. As I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her alone with the evidence of her betrayal, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't the ending I'd wanted, but it was the one she'd left me with. I'd loved her once, and maybe part of me always would. But that love had been twisted beyond recognition, replaced by the cold, hard truth she'd forced me to face. And as I closed the door behind me, I knew that this was the end of us, the end of everything we'd built, everything we'd dreamed. In the weeks following Claire's departure, life took on a strange, numb quality. I moved through each day like I was underwater, focused on getting the kids to school, going to work, coming home, all on autopilot. People asked questions, concerned neighbors who'd noticed her absence or friends who'd heard rumors. I gave them the same rehearsed answer, Claire and I are taking time apart. It was easier than explaining the full truth. The kids took it hard. I told them that Mom was away for a while and didn't go into details. They didn't need to know what had happened yet, they just needed to feel like everything would be okay. I kept up appearances, tried to give them as much normalcy as I could, but it was hard. Every day felt like a slog through memories that cut deeper than I could handle. One rainy evening, about a month after she left, I came home late from work. The kids were at my parents' house, staying over for the weekend, which gave me some much-needed space. I made a half-hearted attempt at dinner, but the silence of the empty house was oppressive, each room a reminder of the life Claire and I had shared. Just as I sat down to eat, my phone buzzed. I glanced down to see her name, an unwelcome echo from a past I wanted to forget. I ignored it, but she called again and again, each missed call flashing insistently on the screen. My hand shook as I finally answered. Mark, her voice came through, a strange mix of desperation and sorrow. Please, I need to talk to you. Just, please, can we meet? What do you want, Claire? I asked, my voice cold and flat. You said everything you needed to say the last time we talked. She was silent for a moment, then took a shaky breath. I know you hate me, and I don't blame you. But I need you to listen. Please, just once. Meet me at the park, where we used to take the kids. I wanted to hang up, to tell her I was done with her games, but something in her voice stopped me. She sounded different, like the weight of everything had finally broken her down. Against my better judgment, I agreed, and 15 minutes later, I was pulling into the empty parking lot of the small park where we'd taken the kids so many times. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick with mist. I spotted her sitting alone on a bench, her head bowed, looking small and defeated. I walked over, the crunch of my footsteps loud in the stillness. She looked up as I approached, her face pale and worn, with dark circles under her eyes. She was a shell of the woman I'd once known. Thank you for coming, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't sit down. I kept my distance, crossing my arms. Just say what you have to say, Claire. She swallowed, looking down at her hands. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. What I did to you, to our family, it was unforgivable. I know that. But I need you to understand something. I didn't respond, and after a moment, she continued, her voice trembling. When you left, it broke me. I thought I could handle it, thought I could live with what I'd done, but I can't. Mark, I've tried to pick up the pieces, tried to find some way to keep going, but, she trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. Claire, what are you trying to say? I asked, feeling a cold dread settle over me. She looked up at me, a haunted look in her eyes. I don't think I can live with myself, Mark. I don't think I can keep going. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I took a step back, shaken, unsure if I'd heard her right. Claire, you don't mean that. She gave a sad, bitter smile. Don't I? I've lost everything, Mark. I lost you, I lost the kids, all because of my own choices. And every day, I live with the knowledge that I destroyed the only good things I had. I wanted to tell her she could move on, that people make mistakes and learn to live with them. But the words wouldn't come. I didn't know if I believed them myself. She was right about one thing, she had destroyed our family. She'd left us all in pieces, and it seemed there was no way to put them back together. After a long silence, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope, extending it to me. Here. I wrote a letter for the kids. I know you won't ever let me back into their lives, and I understand that. But please, give this to them one day. When they're old enough. I stared at the envelope, hesitating. Then, reluctantly, I took it from her hand, slipping it into my jacket pocket without a word. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. She looked at me, her eyes full of sadness and regret, and I could see the weight of her choices etched into every line of her face. I didn't say goodbye. I turned and walked away, feeling the cold mist settle over me as I left her sitting there, alone on the bench. When I reached my car, I glanced back once, but she hadn't moved, her figure barely visible through the fog. I drove home in silence, my mind heavy with the memory of her broken expression. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the last time I'd see her, that something irrevocable had happened on that park bench. But I pushed the thought aside, telling myself she'd figure it out. She'd move on, just like I was trying to. The next morning, I got the call. My hands went numb as the officer's voice came through the line, informing me that Claire had been found in her apartment, lifeless, a bottle of pills on her nightstand. I barely registered his words, my mind reeling as the reality set in. For a long time, I sat there, staring blankly at the wall, unable to process what I'd heard. She was gone, really gone, and there was nothing I could do to change it. The anger I'd clung to for so long dissolved, leaving behind only a hollow ache that I couldn't escape. Later, when I went to clear out her apartment, I found another letter, addressed to me. With trembling hands, I opened it, reading her final words as the weight of everything crashed over me. Mark, I'm sorry. For everything. I know I can never undo the damage I caused, but I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me. I didn't deserve your love, but I cherished it all the same. Tell the kids I love them, that they were my light. Take care of them, and take care of yourself. Goodbye, Claire. As I sat there, clutching the letter, I felt the tears come, breaking through the walls I'd built around my heart. She was gone, and with her went any chance of closure, any hope of redemption. All that was left were the shattered pieces of our life, fragments of a love that had been tarnished but not entirely erased. In that moment, I realized that no amount of anger or vengeance could fill the void she'd left behind. I'd gotten my revenge, but it hadn't brought me peace. It hadn't erased the memories, the love, the life we'd built together. It had only left me empty, with nothing but a quiet, aching sorrow that would linger long after she was gone. And as I walked away from her apartment, the final chapter of our story written, I knew that some wounds never truly healed, they simply became part of you, scars that remained long after the pain had faded.